On the hottest day of July in 1988, a taxi driver on the island of Ibiza noticed a woman lying on the side of the road next to a bicycle. She was unconscious, bleeding from her head, alone. He brought her to a hospital. They looked at this thin, weathered woman with deep lines on her face and assumed it was heat stroke. They didn't run a scan. They didn't check for fractures. By 8 o'clock that evening, she was dead. Her name was Christa Paffgen, but the world had known her as Nico, and the world, for the most part, had already forgotten her. If you think this is just another story about a rock star who faded away, I need you to stay with me. Because what happened to Nico, what was done to her and what she did in spite of it, is one of the most extraordinary and heartbreaking arcs in the history of rock and roll. If that sounds like something you want to hear, hit subscribe right now, because stories like this one are exactly what we do here. She was born in Cologne, Germany on October 16, 1938, 1 year before the world caught fire. Her father, Wilhelm, was conscripted into the Wehrmacht. He didn't come back. The details are unclear. One account says he was shot by a sniper, another that he suffered brain damage and spent the rest of his days in an institution. What's certain is that Christa grew up without him, in a country that was being bombed into rubble. She and her mother fled Cologne for the Spreewald forest outside Berlin, hiding from the Allied bombardments, sometimes sleeping in a bathtub because the walls around them were no longer walls. By the time she was 15, the war was over, but the damage was permanent. She was tall, striking, angular, and she had learned, as children of war often do, that beauty was currency. She began modeling in Berlin. Within a few years, she was in Paris, working for Vogue, walking for Coco Chanel. And then Federico Fellini put her in La Dolce Vita. She was 21. She was in a Fellini film. The whole of Europe was looking at her. And none of it, not a single frame of that glamorous life, was what she actually wanted. What Nico wanted was music. She had wanted to sing since she was a small girl, listening to opera on her grandfather's radio in the Spreewald. But the world kept turning her into an object, the beautiful blonde, the European muse, the face on the magazine cover. She was never asked what she thought or what she felt. She was asked to stand still and be looked at. She drifted through the early 60s between Paris, London, and New York, collecting famous lovers the way other people collect postcards. She had a brief relationship with the French film star Alain Delon. In 1962, she gave birth to a son, Christian Aaron, whom she called Ari. Delon refused to acknowledge the child, flatly, publicly. He never recognized that boy as his own, not once in his entire life. Eventually, Delon's own mother, Edith, took the child in and raised him. Nico's son was taken from her, not by force, but by circumstance, by poverty, by the slow collapse of every structure around her. And then, in 1965, she walked into Andy Warhol's factory. The factory was everything and nothing at once. A silver-walled warehouse on East 47th Street in Manhattan, where artists, addicts, socialites, and misfits orbited Warhol like moths around a floodlight. Nico fit right in and didn't fit at all. She was too serious for the parties, too European for the irony. But Warhol saw something in her that went beyond the cheekbones and the spectral presence. He saw a front woman. He had a band he wanted to reshape, the Velvet Underground. Lou Reed, John Cale, Sterling Morrison, Maureen Tucker. They were raw, abrasive, brilliant, and completely unsigned. Warhol decided Nico would be their singer. not a suggestion, a directive. He told the band she was part of the package. If they wanted his backing, his name, his platform, the multimedia show he called the exploding plastic inevitable, they took the German girl with the deep voice. They did not want her. Lou Reed in particular resented her presence from the very first rehearsal. At early sessions, the band would pull out her microphone cable. They would blast guitar noise over her voice, anything to make her feel unwelcome, anything to remind her she was not one of them. Nico later said that Lou never liked her because of what her people had done to his people, a reference to the fact that Reed was Jewish and she was German. Whether that was the whole truth or a fraction of it, the hostility was real and it was relentless. And yet, she sang. On the album that would become one of the most important debut records in rock history, The Velvet Underground and Nico, released in 1967, her voice is on 3 of the most haunting tracks ever recorded. Femme Fatale, All Tomorrow's Parties, I'll Be Your Mirror. That last one, I'll be your mirror, reflect what you are, in case you don't know, is one of the most tender, devastating love songs in the entire rock canon, and it was sung by a woman the band couldn't stand. Think about that. She gave them beauty they didn't want to receive. The album sold almost nothing at first, fewer than 30,000 copies in its first 5 years. Radio wouldn't touch it. Critics were baffled. But something about that record refused to die. It kept circulating, kept finding new ears, kept pulling people in. Brian Eno would later say that everyone who bought a copy of The Velvet Underground and Nico went out and started a band. It would take decades for the world to understand what it was. And by then, Nico was already gone, pushed out of the group within months of the record's release. The band didn't need her anymore, and they made sure she knew it. Warhol moved on to his next project. Reed moved on. She was alone again, as she had been so many times before. Her first solo album, Chelsea Girl, came out the same year. It featured songs written by Reed, Cale, Jackson Browne, and Bob Dylan. It should have been a triumph. Instead, the producer Tom Wilson added lush string arrangements against Nico's explicit wishes. She hated it. Years later, she said she still couldn't listen to it. The album that was supposed to launch her solo career felt, to her, like another act of erasure, someone else deciding what her voice should sound like. So she did something radical. She picked up a harmonium, a small, droning, wheezing organ that most people had never heard of, and she began to write her own music. Not songs that sounded like Chelsea Girl, not songs that sounded like anyone. She wrote music that came from some deep, uncharted place inside her, a place shaped by war, abandonment, and a lifetime of being treated as decoration. The result was the Marble Index, released in 1969, produced by John Cale. Nothing in popular music sounded like it. Nothing sounds like it now. It was dark, atonal, hypnotic, her voice dropping into registers that felt like someone singing from the bottom of a well. Elektra Records had no idea how to sell it. Critics didn't know what to do with it. The label barely promoted it. It sold a few thousand copies. But those few thousand copies changed the people who heard them. She followed it with Desertshore in 1970, even more stark, even more otherworldly. Ari, her young son, sings on the opening track, Le Petit Chevalier, his small voice floating over drones that feel like the end of civilization. It is one of the most haunting moments in any album from that era, a mother and her child making art together in the ruins of a life that had given them almost nothing. Then came The End in 1974, recorded in a crumbling studio, Nico's voice sounding like it was coming from inside a crypt. These records are now considered masterpieces. They influenced everyone from Susie Sue to Radiohead to PJ Harvey. But at the time they were commercial failures, and Nico was broke. The 70s brought Philippe Garrel, a French film director who became her lover and her collaborator. They made films together, austere and beautiful, the kind of art that plays in empty cinemas. But Garrel's world came with heroin. Nico had claimed she never touched the drug during her time with the Velvets or at the factory. It was in Paris with Garrel that she crossed that line, and once she was in, she stayed for more than 15 years. Heroin became the architecture of her daily life, the first thought in the morning, the last thought at night, the reason she got on a stage and the reason she almost couldn't. She toured constantly, not because she wanted to, but because she needed the money. By the early 1980s, she had settled in Manchester, England, in the grey industrial neighborhoods of Prestwich and Salford. She said the city reminded her of Berlin, the ruined Berlin of her childhood. She performed relentlessly. Some estimates put her at over 1,200 shows between 1980 and 1988, crisscrossing Europe with a small band called The Faction, playing in clubs, basements, squats, any venue that would have her. The money went straight into her arm. The shows were unpredictable. Some nights she could barely stand, her voice cracking, the harmonium wheezing out of tune. Other nights she was transcendent, that deep, ancient voice filling the room like smoke, the audience completely still, holding their breath. People who saw her in those years say it was like watching someone channel ghosts. She released one more studio album, Camera Obscura, in 1985, produced by John Cale once again, a reunion of two artists who understood each other's darkness. It was largely ignored. In 1986, her manager, Alan Wise, convinced her to try methadone. Her main dealer had been arrested, which made the transition slightly less impossible. Slowly, painfully, she began to step away from heroin. By 1988, she was riding a bicycle every day, eating better, trying to rebuild a body that decades of addiction had nearly destroyed. She was 49 years old. Her face was lined, her teeth were damaged, her body bore the scars of 1,000 needles. But she was alive, and she was clean, and for the first time in years there was something that looked like hope. And then, on July 18, 1988, on the island of Ibiza, where she had gone on holiday with Ari, she got on her bicycle to ride to the beach. She fell. She hit her head. A taxi driver found her on the side of the road and brought her to the hospital. They thought it was the heat. They didn't scan her skull. They didn't order an X-ray. Inside her brain, a cerebral hemorrhage was spreading silently. By the time anyone understood what was happening, it was too late. Nico died that evening, alone in a hospital bed, on one of the hottest days of the year. Her son Ari didn't learn she had died until the following day, when he went to the police to report her missing. She left behind a body of work that the world is still catching up to. The Marble Index and Desertshore have been reissued, reappraised, and celebrated as visionary. Her voice, that strange, low, German-accented instrument that no one in the Velvet Underground wanted to hear, is now recognized as one of the most distinctive in all of popular music. She didn't sing like anyone before her, and no one has managed to sing like her since. But here's what stays with me. Nico spent her entire life being turned into someone else's idea, a model, a muse, a Warhol creation, a problem for Lou Reed, a cautionary tale. And through all of it, she kept making music that belonged to no one but her. She kept singing, even when the rooms were empty, even when the needle was in her arm, even when no one was listening. She wasn't waiting to be rediscovered. She was just doing the only thing that had ever been truly hers. If this story moved you the way it moved me, then you already know this channel is for you. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and click on the video on your screen right now, because the next story is just as powerful, and I don't want you to miss it.